There was a woman so beautiful, sleeping peacefully, or so it seemed. But behind her delicate features hid a curse darker than any fairy tale could tell. Her slumber wasn't magic, it was a prison, crafted from betrayal, blood, and unspeakable forces. For generations, whispers of Sleeping Beauty's darkest secret have haunted the shadows, warning that some curses don't end with a kiss. Tonight, we uncover the horrifying truth behind her eternal sleep, a story of terror, dark magic, and a nightmare that has lingered far longer than the tale itself. In a kingdom where shadows clung to every corner of gilded halls, a king and queen yearned for a child. Their palace was alive with splendor, yet cold and hollow. Each chamber echoed with their longing. Nights were haunted by silent whispers and the soft wail of emptiness. One day, as the queen soaked in her marble tub, a frog emerged from the still, murky water, its glassy eyes glinting with a strange, unnatural intelligence. "Your wish shall be fulfilled," it croaked, its voice rasping like wind through dry leaves. "Before the year ends, you will bear a daughter more beautiful than the first light of dawn." Joy surged through the royal hearts, yet unease lingered, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. Invitations were sent to family, nobles, and 13 wise women keepers of gifts both wondrous and perilous. But the banquet had only 12 golden plates. One wise woman would go uninvited. The feast was a spectacle of grandeur. Chandeliers glittered, music swirled like smoke, and servants moved like shadows across the marble floors. The 12 wise women bestowed their gifts upon the newborn princess: virtue, beauty, grace, wisdom, and wealth. But the 13th was absent. Soon, a chill swept through the hall. Doors banged open, and a figure cloaked in black fury appeared. Her face twisted, eyes burning with rage. She did not bow, did not greet. Her voice rang sharp and cold, a sound that silenced music, laughter, and even the flickering flames of the torches. In her 15th year, she shall prick her finger upon a spindle and die. A gasp rippled through the hall. The king's hands clenched the armrest of his throne, knuckles white. The queen shrank back, trembling. Despair fell like a heavy fog. But before the shadow of death could claim the court's hope, the 12th wise woman stepped forward, her eyes grave, lips pressed in solemn determination. "She shall not die," she intoned, her voice both warning and consolation. "Only sleep for 100 years." The words barely eased the terror. A dark seed had been planted in Briar Rose's life, a curse that would grow like a creeping vine through the years. The king, desperate to protect his daughter, commanded every spindle in the kingdom burned. Yet fate, as it always does, bends to no one. Not kings, not queens, not even wise women. Briar Rose grew under watchful eyes, a child of unparalleled beauty and gentle grace. Courtiers whispered of her charm, her smiles that could warm the coldest hearth. Yet beneath the laughter and joy, an unseen darkness waited, silent and patient. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little longer when she passed. Every silent corner of the castle seemed to watch her. The kingdom thrived, yet the people whispered in hushed tones, fearful of the curse that hovered like a storm on the horizon. And in the heart of the palace, the seeds of doom waited, knowing the moment would come when curiosity, youth, and a single careless touch would awaken the curse, plunging the royal household into a silence deeper and darker than death itself. Thus began the story of Briar Rose, the princess who would sleep, the kingdom that would wait, and the curse that would not be denied. Briar Rose grew under the heavy gaze of the castle's walls, her life a gilded cage of beauty and caution. Though the king spared no effort to surround her with tutors, entertainers, and companions, there was always a whisper in the corridors, a quiet, unspoken warning that fate's shadow trailed her every step. The servants tread softly, fearing to disturb the invisible threads that bound her to the curse, while the courtiers often spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously at spinning wheels and old tools hidden in the farthest towers. Despite the constant protection, curiosity, that insistent ember, began to stir in Briar Rose's heart. She would wander the castle halls alone, her delicate fingers brushing over carved banisters, her eyes drinking in the intricate tapestries and frozen tapestries of past rulers. At night, she lay awake in her chamber, listening to the wind hiss through the cracks in the stone, imagining the far-off forests and mountains beyond the walls. The castle, though splendid, felt like a tomb. Every laughter, every flicker of candlelight seemed tinged with unease. The king, desperate to shield his daughter, forbade all spindles, looms, and threads of flax to enter the castle. Yet fate, patient and cunning, finds cracks in the strongest walls. Briar Rose's curiosity was a lantern in darkness, and it would guide her to the tower where old secrets slept. It was a narrow staircase, winding like a serpent, leading to a chamber long forgotten, draped in dust and cobwebs. At the top, a small rusted door stood as if waiting for her. When she turned the key, it groaned open, revealing a room frozen in time. In the corner, an old woman sat spinning flax, her fingers nimble, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Good day, old woman," Briar Rose called, her voice a whisper among the silence. "What are you doing?" "I am spinning," the woman replied, nodding slowly, the fibers glinting like silver threads in the dim light. Drawn to the spindle as if by some invisible force, Briar Rose reached out. Her fingers brushed the smooth wood, and in that instant the curse took hold. A sharp prick seared through her fingertip. She gasped, stumbled backward, and fell onto a nearby bed, her world dissolving into darkness. The castle seemed to shudder with her. All the servants froze mid-step. The flames in the hearth flickered and died, and the animals slumped in unnatural stillness. Outside, the garden thorns twisted, thickened, and grew taller, forming a living barrier, impassable and merciless. The kingdom was trapped in a frozen nightmare, time suspended by the relentless grip of fate. Briar Rose lay in a death-like sleep, her beauty untouched, her innocence preserved, yet the darkness had claimed her. And so the castle waited, encased in silence, overgrown with thorn and shadow, until the hour when destiny itself would come, breaking the curse with courage, with risk, with the inevitable arrival of a prince daring enough to breach the deadly embrace of the thorns. In the stillness, the castle whispered Briar Rose's name, a song of warning and longing echoing through the years, waiting for the day when the first touch of fate would awaken her, and the darkness within her story would stir once more. The castle had fallen silent, swallowed by the creeping shadows of its own curse. Thick, gnarled thorns had spiraled outward from the walls, twisting skyward like jagged black claws. Birds no longer dared sing in the gardens, and even the wind seemed hesitant, whispering nervously through the twisted branches. Time itself appeared to stall within the castle grounds. The sun rose and fell, yet the halls remained frozen in an eerie limbo. Servants slumped in mid-motion, candles burned in slow, cold exhaustion, and the king and queen, trapped in their chambers, could do nothing but stare at the lifeless air. Stories of the sleeping princess spread quietly, carried on the winds to the nearby villages. Travelers whispered of a castle wrapped in thorns so thick that no man could breach it. Some claimed the princess had died. Others said she had merely fallen into a sleep from which no mortal could awaken her. The most daring among them, ambitious young princes with swords polished and hearts aflame, journeyed to the castle, determined to claim the legendary beauty. One by one they tried. They hacked at the thorns with gleaming steel, only to find that the branches moved as if alive. Each cut was met with resistance, sharp spines tearing through cloth and flesh alike. Some fell, impaled by the merciless growth. Others vanished, swallowed whole by the hedge that seemed to breathe and twist like a living thing. The thorns were more than a barrier. They were guardians, cruel and exacting, protecting the princess from all who dared trespass. Inside, Briar Rose slept on, her breath slow and even, yet somehow the curse had imbued her with a presence that echoed beyond the walls. Her beauty was unyielding, untouched by time, yet a subtle darkness clung to her dreams. Even in slumber, the curse whispered through her mind, threads of fate spinning endlessly, binding her life to forces beyond comprehension. The castle itself became a legend, Villagers spoke of strange sounds at night, the creak of ancient doors, a faint humming, the rustle of leaves that moved without wind. Some said the animals in the stables sometimes blinked awake, stared with empty eyes, and then sank back into sleep. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, and travelers claimed that those who wandered too close often disappeared, leaving only their echoing screams behind. It was during this long century of silence that the curse truly became a force of terror. It was no longer simply a sleeping princess. It was a test, a trap, a reminder that beauty and innocence can mask unimaginable danger. Those who sought her were never prepared for the relentless, almost sentient power of the thorns. The hedge grew, twisted, and remembered. Every failure added to its strength. Every death fed its hunger. And yet, even as the castle remained shrouded in darkness, the SUBSRIBE's story of Briar Rose endured. Legends whispered of a prince who would one day arrive, fearless and determined, capable of passing through the living barrier and confronting the curse. Until that day, the castle waited. Time moved differently within its walls, slow and cruel, preserving both life and terror. A tomb of roses and shadow where no one dared tread, and where the silent princess slept, dreaming of the world she might never see. The castle remained shrouded in silence, a monument to time suspended. Briar Rose lay in her death-like sleep, pale and perfect, untouched by the years, while the thick hedge of thorns twisted higher, its jagged tips scratching at the sky. Every branch, every spine, seemed to pulse with an almost conscious intent. The castle had become more than a prison. It was a warning, a shrine to the power of curses, and a reminder that even the most beautiful things could harbor death. Yet outside the castle, the world moved on. Stories of the sleeping princess became legend, told in whispers around hearths and in darkened taverns. Travelers spoke of a young girl cursed to sleep for a century, her beauty unparalleled, her life suspended by magic older than kingdoms. Most dismissed these tales as myth, yet some who had ventured too close returned with tales of horror. A living hedge that devoured swords, halls where shadows lingered like living things, and a silence so absolute it pressed against the ears, suffocating those who dared approach. Inside the castle, the curse's reach extended beyond Briar Rose. Servants lay frozen mid-step, their expressions a grotesque mirror of fear and disbelief. The animals, once lively and playful, slumped in their stalls, eyes dull, fur bristling unnaturally. Even the hearths, where flames had once danced, now glowed weakly. Shadows stretching long and strange across cold stone walls. The castle had become a living nightmare, a place where life and death intertwined, bound together by magic and fate. But the threads of destiny cannot remain dormant forever. Legends spoke of a prince who would come, drawn not by tales of beauty, but by the pull of fate itself. He would be fearless, cunning, and willing to confront the unnatural horrors that had claimed so many before him. The hedge would twist and writhe, testing his courage, yet he would press forward, guided by something stronger than hope, an invisible, inexorable force pulling him toward the sleeping princess. In the castle, the silence seemed almost to breathe. Doors groaned as if shifting, floors creaked under invisible weight, and shadows pooled in corners like waiting predators. Briar Rose's chest rose and fell with measured, dreamlike rhythm. Yet beneath her perfect calm, faint whispers stirred echoes of the curse, reminders that her life, though paused, remained entwined with forces beyond understanding. The thorns, unyielding and merciless, reached skyward, a labyrinth of pain and warning. Each failed prince had fed the hedge, their screams and blood absorbed into the roots, making it stronger, sharper, alive. Yet despite the horror, despite the deaths that had gone uncounted, the castle awaited. Time within its walls was a cruel illusion, each second stretching endlessly, preserving both beauty and terror. And somewhere, beyond the twisted, blackened brambles, the first signs of destiny began to stir. A young prince, unaware of the horrors he would face, journeyed toward the castle, drawn by legend, by fate, by something deeper still. he would soon confront the curse, the sleeping princess, and the darkness that had claimed an entire kingdom. The stage was set, and the whispers of fate were growing louder. The hour of awakening approached, and nothing would ever be the same. The prince rode through the misted forest that surrounded the kingdom, the sun struggling to pierce the gray veil of clouds. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch underfoot, made him tense, as if the forest itself were watching him. Travelers spoke of the cursed castle, of the sleeping princess, and of the countless young men who had vanished, swallowed by thorns that seemed alive. Yet he pressed on, driven not by tales of beauty, but by something far older, an invisible pull, a whisper of destiny threading its way through the centuries. As he approached the castle, the thorns revealed their true terror. They stretched higher than walls, twisted like serpents, sharp as spears, their tips dripping with dew that glimmered like blood in the pale light. The hedge was no ordinary growth. It seemed to breathe, shifting subtly when he drew near, as if testing his resolve. Swords, axes, and men alike had fallen before these living barriers, their bodies lost among the twisting brambles. Yet the prince felt a cold determination settle over him. He dismounted, his hands brushing against the sharp thorns as he navigated the labyrinthine wall. Pain seared his fingers, yet he pressed on, cutting only where absolutely necessary. Every step was a test, every heartbeat a challenge. The thorns seemed to hiss with malice, whispering of failure, warning of death. He glimpsed shadows moving within the dense growth memories of those who had come before him, frozen in agony. The hedge was alive with their echoes, a guardian that fed on fear, on failure, on blood. At last, he reached the gate, or what appeared to be a gate, hidden among the thorns. It was massive, wrought from black iron, covered in crawling vines and sharp thorns. With trembling hands, he pushed it open, the sound echoing like a scream through the silent castle. The air inside was thick, musty, smelling of age and magic long undisturbed. The castle seemed empty, yet every shadow moved, every sound amplified, as if aware of his presence. He wandered through deserted halls, the silence pressing in on all sides. Servants frozen mid-step, animals slumped in impossible poses, and the flickering of extinguished torches created shapes that danced along the walls like ghosts. The prince's heart pounded as he climbed the winding staircase, the air growing colder, heavier, as though the castle itself sought to warn him off. Each step carried him closer to the tower, closer to the sleeping princess whose life and curse had held the entire kingdom hostage. When he finally reached the chamber, the sight stole his breath. Briar Rose lay upon a bed of pale silks, untouched by time, her skin luminous, her hair like spun gold, her lips soft and slightly parted, as if breathing in a dream that was not hers alone. The prince approached cautiously, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He reached out, hand trembling, and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. The room seemed to hold its breath, the curse itself waiting for his next move. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint stir, imperceptible at first, rippled through the still air. Destiny had arrived, yet the darkness of the curse was patient and cunning. The prince did not yet know that the trials were only beginning, and that the true horror of the Thorn Castle was far from over. The prince knelt beside Briar Rose, his heart hammering as though it could shatter the centuries of silence surrounding her. The room was thick with stillness, a tomb of shadows and faded light, and yet something about the air vibrated a subtle hum that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. The thorns outside had parted just enough to allow him through, as though destiny had whispered a passage for him alone. He traced a trembling finger along her pale cheek, marveling at the softness that belied the curse's cruelty. Her lips were cold, yet perfect, untouched by time. A shiver ran down his spine, not of fear, but of the uncanny sense that she was aware, somehow, though asleep. The whispers of the curse had grown faint, as if waiting, measuring his courage, testing his resolve. Suddenly, a shadow shifted. Near the window, a fleeting figure of the old castle, or perhaps something older, a sentinel of the curse. The prince froze, eyes wide, heart clenching. The air felt electric, thick with anticipation. Then, almost imperceptibly, her hand twitched. A soft flutter, so delicate it could have been mistaken for a breeze. He leaned closer, breath held, watching as Briar Rose's eyelids flickered. The slightest hint of life sparked within them, a golden glow that pushed back the chill of her centuries-long sleep. Her fingers twitched again, and the prince felt the weight of the ages pressing down on him. The curse was not yet broken. It waited, cunning, patient, as it had for 100 years, and every movement he made could awaken forces he did not yet understand. The castle seemed to respond to the stirrings of her awakening. Shadows lengthened, pooling in corners, then pulling back as if recoiling from the fragile light emerging in her eyes. The floorboards creaked under invisible weight. A chill wind rustled the silks of the bed, carrying with it a scent of old roses and iron. The prince's hands shook as he brushed a lock of golden hair from her forehead, his courage mingling with dread. A faint groan escaped her lips, soft as a whisper, yet it resonated through the chamber like a spell breaking. The prince dared to place a hand over hers, feeling the warmth returning to her skin. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises like dawn mist, wide and bewildered. For a moment, the world held its breath. The curse had weakened, but it had not surrendered. Outside, the thorns trembled, twisting violently as if in rage, sensing the threat to their dominion. The prince felt a sudden pressure in his chest, a warning, a reminder that the castle itself was alive with malice. Yet Briar Rose's gaze met his, confused but alive, and a spark of hope ignited within him. "Who are you?" she murmured, her voice weak but clear, echoing faintly against the frozen walls. I am here to wake you," the prince whispered, his own voice trembling, yet resolute. "I am here to bring you back." And as he spoke, the castle seemed to exhale, the shadows recoiling slightly, the wind outside softening. The first stage of awakening had begun, fragile and terrifying. A battle not yet won, as centuries of darkness stirred to resist the fragile light returning to the princess's eyes. The curse would not yield easily, but the threads of fate had begun to unravel, and nothing would ever be the same again. The moment Briar Rose's eyes fully opened, the castle reacted violently, as though angered at the breach of its centuries-long dominion. Shadows twisted along the walls, crawling like living smoke, and the cold wind that had long been trapped within the stone corridors surged, rattling doors and extinguishing torches. The prince gripped her hand tightly, guiding her from the bed, but even as she stirred, the castle refused to release its grip. The walls groaned as the centuries of silence were shattered. The frozen servants shifted unnaturally, their expressions a grotesque mixture of confusion and horror, some reaching toward the pair with stiff, grasping hands. The animals in the stables stirred, low growls and panicked bleats echoing through the vast halls. Even the inanimate objects seemed to rebel. The chandeliers swayed ominously, tapestries rustled without wind, and a sense of oppressive malevolence pressed down on every surface. Outside, the thorned barrier flared to life. Brambles twisted violently, extending their spiked fingers outward like the talons of a monstrous beast. The prince could see the skeletal traces of failed suitors trapped within the hedge, remnants of past attempts, twisted swords, shattered armor, fragments of bones, all intertwined with the living brambles. The thorns hissed, snapping and writhing, as if warning the intruders that the castle itself would defend the sleeping princess. Briar Rose, now fully awake but still groggy, looked around in wide-eyed terror. The centuries-long stillness had left the castle a place of nightmares. What is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The prince tried to calm her, but the air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against their lungs with a cold, suffocating weight. The old curse, patient and cunning, was not finished. Shadows deepened in the corners, pooling into vaguely humanoid shapes. The whisper of silk on stone echoed unnaturally, and cold fingers of air brushed against the skin of the awakened princess. It was as if the castle remembered every death, every moment of fear, and now sought to punish those who dared defy it. The prince tightened his grip on her hand and forced a step forward. Each movement was met with resistance, the floor trembling beneath them, furniture shifting as if to block their path. A low rumble, almost like a growl, vibrated through the walls, sending chills down their spines. Briar Rose clung to him, her terror and confusion mirrored in his own racing heart. Yet amidst the chaos, a faint pulse of warmth began to spread from Briar Rose, a fragile light against the oppressive darkness. The curse had been weakened, but it would take more than awakening to dissolve the ancient magic entirely. The prince whispered words of courage, even as the castle's malevolent presence seemed to close in, surrounding them like a cage. The first stage of rebellion by the ancient curse had begun, a terrifying demonstration of the power that had kept Briar Rose imprisoned for 100 years. The castle was alive, and it would not yield without a fight. The prince and the princess were no longer just intruders. They were challengers to a centuries-old force, and the dark heart of the castle was just beginning to awaken. Outside, the thorns writhed, waiting for the moment to strike. As the first real test of courage, cunning, and survival began, the castle's nightmare had only just begun. Briar Rose clutched the prince's hand tightly, her pulse racing as the castle writhed around them. Every corridor seemed alive with intent, shadows stretching long and serpentine across the walls, twisting into grotesque forms that whispered and hissed. The prince could hear faint echoes of cries, some human, some not, as the castle tested their courage, attempting to trap them in the suffocating darkness. The air grew thick with the scent of decay and damp stone. Candles flickered and extinguished themselves, leaving patches of pitch black that seemed to reach toward the pair like fingers. Each step they took caused the floorboards to groan ominously, as though the castle itself disapproved of their intrusion. Briar Rose shivered, feeling a cold hand brush against her shoulder, only to find nothing there. The curse was clever, patient, and cruel. It toyed with them, letting fear take root before the next test arrived. Suddenly, from the depths of the castle, a shrill wail echoed. It was a sound not of the living, nor fully of the dead, a fusion of torment, rage, and desperation. The prince gritted his teeth and pulled Briar Rose forward, but the hallway seemed to elongate unnaturally, doors and staircases shifting, forcing them deeper into the labyrinthine halls. Shadows began to gather into forms, vaguely human but impossibly stretched and distorted, blocking their path. The prince swung his sword, slicing through a shadowy figure, only to see it dissolve into a thick, black mist that reformed elsewhere. Every strike they made seemed futile, every movement punished by the castle's relentless defense. Briar Rose's whispers grew frantic. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why won't it let us leave?" "It's the curse," the prince replied, his own voice tight with fear. "It's alive. It remembers everyone who has failed. It won't let us go without a fight." They turned a corner and found themselves facing a staircase that led upward, but the steps were slick with an unnatural frost. As they ascended, faint faces appeared in the wall's previous princes, caught and claimed by the castle, their expressions frozen in eternal agony. Their mouths opened in silent screams, eyes imploring, warning, accusing. Briar Rose gasped and covered her face with trembling hands, the sight almost unbearable. Finally, they reached a grand hall, the ceiling so high it vanished into shadow. A cold wind blew through broken windows, carrying the faint, iron-tinged scent of blood. The thorns outside rattled violently, the hedge seeming to respond to the disturbance within. The prince realized that escaping the castle meant facing the final guardian, the heart of the curse itself, a dark, pulsing force rooted in the oldest magic of the kingdom. The prince squared his shoulders, gripping Briar Rose's hand. "We face it together," he said, and she nodded, her fear momentarily replaced by determination. They stepped forward into the heart of the hall, where the shadows thickened and the air seemed alive, ready to crush them. The castle had been waiting, patient and cruel, for this moment. The first real confrontation with the curse had begun, and neither Briar Rose nor the prince would leave unchanged. The walls seemed to lean inward, the darkness closing in, as centuries of trapped magic prepared to strike at the living intruders. The grand hall pulsed with a malevolent life of its own. Shadows swirled in unnatural patterns, twisting and coiling like serpents, each tendril reaching for the prince and Briar Rose as if to drag them into the walls themselves. The air was thick, almost viscous, pressing against their lungs with every step. An oppressive silence lingered, broken only by the faint, mocking whispers of those who had failed before them. At the center of the hall stood a pedestal, carved from black stone streaked with crimson veins. Upon it rested a spindle, ancient and jagged, glinting like a shard of nightmare. Around it, the shadows seemed to converge, forming a shape tall, hunched, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly red. The heart of the curse, the very essence of the magic that had held Briar Rose and the castle captive for 100 years, had manifested into a being. Its presence was suffocating, an aura of dread that made the prince's sword feel like a child's toy in his hands. Briar Rose clutched his arm, her fingers trembling. It's alive," she whispered, her voice quivering. "It wants to stop us." The creature's hollow eyes fixed on her, and the whispers intensified, echoing inside their skulls, dredging up every fear, every doubt. The prince gritted his teeth. "We've come too far to turn back," he said. "We face it together." The curse lashed out, shadows erupting from the floor and walls to encircle them. The prince swung his sword, cutting through the writhing darkness, but each strike was met with resistance, the shadows flowing around the blade as if alive. Briar Rose, though terrified, stepped forward, drawing upon the courage the prince had awakened within her. She reached for the spindle, trembling, feeling its jagged edge bite at her skin as if testing her resolve. The whispers screamed now, voices of the trapped, the cursed, the lost, all converging into a cacophony that threatened to shatter their minds. "Leave, or join us, forever," they hissed. But Briar Rose did not falter. She remembered the centuries of suffering, the frozen servants, the lost princes, the cursed hedge of thorns. With a deep breath, she placed her hand firmly upon the spindle, eyes meeting the prince's. A shock of light exploded from the pedestal, searing the shadows with pure brilliance. The curse screamed, a sound like glass shattering and the earth cracking simultaneously. The dark tendrils writhed and screamed, but the prince held her hand, grounding her, giving her strength. The spindle burned in her palm, not with fire, but with the release of the centuries of magic that had bound her and the castle. Slowly, the shadows recoiled, shrinking back into the corners of the hall. The air lightened, the oppressive weight lifting, though remnants of the darkness lingered like scars upon the stone. The curse's heart, its essence, had been broken, shattered by the courage and determination of those who dared to defy it. Briar Rose's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, her skin glowing faintly as life fully returned to her. The prince released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, eyes scanning the hall to ensure the remaining darkness would not rise again. The castle, for the first time in a century, felt still not dead, not alive, but waiting, as though it knew its power had been challenged and lost. The prince and Briar Rose exchanged a glance, a mix of relief and lingering fear. They had survived the heart of the curse, but the castle still held its secrets, and the shadow of its past horrors would not be forgotten. The castle had fallen silent, but the prince and Briar Rose knew the danger was far from over. They approached the main entrance, and beyond it lay the legendary hedge of thorns, the living barrier that had claimed countless lives over the past century. The morning light filtered through the jagged spikes, glinting like serrated teeth. The thorns seemed to pulse, as if sensing the lingering magic that had just been broken. Briar Rose shivered, her fingers entwined with the prince's. "It's huge," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the hedge. Every step closer made the thorns sway subtly, their tips reaching outward as though testing for weakness. Stories of brave princes lost here flooded her mind. Every twig and vine seemed alive, a sentient forest that fed on fear. The prince tightened his grip on her hand, scanning the dense barrier. "We can do this," he said firmly. "We face the curse inside." This is just another test." But even as he spoke, a ripple ran through the thorns. They twisted violently, creating jagged passages, blocking the way forward. The hedge seemed to remember the hundreds of attempts made over a century, every failure etched into its fibers. A cold wind swept through, carrying the faint echoes of screams and laughter, the voices of the lost, the cursed, the long-dead princes whose bodies had been claimed by the living thorns. Briar Rose felt her stomach churn. "I can hear them, their voices," she murmured, a shiver running down her spine. The prince pressed a finger to his lips. "Ignore them. Keep moving. Fear feeds them." The first step was tentative, each footfall a test of courage. As they moved forward, the thorns bent and recoiled, guiding them like a cruel game. At times, gaps appeared, but those spaces were trapped with hidden spikes, thin as needles, which snapped toward them when they stepped too close. Briar Rose stumbled once, narrowly avoiding a piercing thorn that grazed her shoulder, leaving a shallow, bleeding scratch. The prince grabbed her, steadying her and murmuring reassurance. Pain, he realized, was part of the trial the hedge wanted to weaken both body and mind. Hours or perhaps minutes. Time seemed distorted past as they navigated the labyrinth. The thorns continued to whisper, trying to seduce Briar Rose into hesitation, to lure the prince into striking recklessly. Shadows stretched long and unreal, forming grotesque shapes, echoing the horrors of the castle interior. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to escape, yet they pressed on, guided by the faint memory of sunlight and freedom beyond. At last, after a grueling passage, they saw it. The edge of the hedge, where the thorns thinned slightly, revealing the open fields beyond. The barrier hissed in protest, shaking violently, as though reluctant to release its prisoners. With a final surge of courage, they sprinted, their hands clasped tightly, hearts hammering as the last of the thorns swiped and twisted behind them. They emerged into the sunlight, breathless, battered, yet alive. The hedge settled silently behind them, patient and eternal, waiting for the next challengers. Briar Rose and the prince looked at one another, knowing that though the castle had been conquered, the memories, shadows, and curses of its dark legacy would follow them forever. Even in the bright sunlight beyond the thorned labyrinth, Briar Rose felt the weight of the castle's curse pressing on her. Every step toward the open fields seemed deceptively calm, the gentle rustle of the wind carrying faint, almost imperceptible whispers, echoes of the shadows that had once ruled the castle. The prince noticed her hesitation, the way her fingers trembled despite their clasp. "We're free," he said softly, trying to ground her. "But we're not out of danger yet." The fields stretched endlessly, but the air felt heavy, unnaturally thick, as if the curse had followed them beyond the castle walls. Briar Rose's eyes darted nervously to the tree line, where shadows lingered despite the noon sun. The birds sang, but the notes sounded distorted, warped, carrying an undercurrent of menace. She shivered. "It's still here," she whispered, almost afraid to speak the thought aloud. Suddenly, a shape darted between the trees, a figure thin and elongated, moving with unnatural speed. The prince raised his sword instinctively, shielding Briar Rose. The figure froze at the edge of the sunlight, its hollow eyes glinting with malicious intelligence. It was neither fully human nor fully shadow, a fragment of the castle's ancient magic that had followed them, refusing to let the princess escape completely. The creature hissed, its voice like a chorus of whispers merging into one. "You awaken what should not be. Touched, you disturb the balance. You are mine." Briar Rose stepped back, heart pounding, and the prince tightened his grip on her hand. "We're together," he said firmly, "and we will not be taken." The shadow lunged, moving faster than the eye could follow. Briar Rose stumbled, nearly falling, but the prince intercepted it, slashing with his sword. The blade met nothing solid, just cold air and a hiss of rage as the shadow recoiled. It was clever, shifting, almost intangible, but determined. Briar Rose realized then that the curse was not a single force. It was layered, persistent, following her across the boundary of the castle itself. Instinctively, she remembered the spindle, the core of the curse they had just destroyed. It had been a source of unimaginable pain and darkness. If the shadow was tied to it, perhaps they could weaken it further. Summoning courage, Briar Rose closed her eyes, reached inward, and called upon the power she had unknowingly absorbed during her long sleep. The warmth of life within her surged outward, striking at the shadow. The creature shrieked, recoiling violently as if scorched by invisible fire. Its form flickered, losing cohesion, the whispers fading into agonized cries. Briar Rose opened her eyes, determination blazing. "It cannot control me," she shouted, feeling the centuries of darkness weaken. The prince charged forward, striking at the last remnants of the shadow, forcing it back toward the tree line, where it dissolved into smoke. The fields were silent once more, the sun unchallenged, but Briar Rose knew that this was only a temporary reprieve. The castle, the hedge, the shadows, all remnants of an ancient curse, would never fully release their hold on her. The darkness had been confronted, yes, but it lingered like a scar, waiting for the next lapse, the next moment of vulnerability. Briar Rose turned to the prince, gratitude and fear mingling in her gaze. "We survived," she whispered. "But the darkness, it's still with us," he nodded solemnly. "And we will face it together." Briar Rose and the prince had barely left the castle behind when the first signs of lingering darkness began to appear. The fields, once serene, now seemed to twist and warp under the sunlight, shadows stretching unnaturally long, slithering across the ground as though alive. Birds scattered in frantic bursts, and the wind carried a whisper of warning, a voice that felt both familiar and chilling. As they approached the nearby village, unease settled in Briar Rose's chest like a stone. Doors swung open with eerie creaks, windows rattled despite calm air, and the villagers, ordinary men and women going about their day, stopped, their eyes wide with a strange, haunted look. Faces turned pale, mouths opened in silent screams, and some collapsed to their knees as though weighed down by an invisible force. "It's the curse," Briar Rose whispered, gripping the prince's arm. "It followed us. It's not confined to the castle anymore." The prince nodded, eyes scanning the streets. Shadows danced along the walls of cottages, elongating into monstrous forms that seemed to leer at the villagers. An old woman screamed as her reflection in a mirror distorted into something grotesque, a dark, hollow-eyed version of herself. Children clung to their parents, sensing the unnatural presence, crying out as shadows slithered over the cobblestones, leaving faint black streaks where they passed. The prince drew his sword, moving protectively in front of Briar Rose. "We have to reach the center of the village. Whatever is causing this is strongest there." They pushed forward, stepping carefully over the strange black residue left by the shadows. The villagers parted, frozen in fear or mesmerized by the darkness, some whispering incoherently, "She's awake. She has awakened." At the village square, the air grew heavier. The fountain in the center churned with water that darkened into a thick, black sludge, and statues lining the square twisted as though alive, their stone faces contorting into expressions of rage and despair. A low, vibrating hum filled the square, almost like the pulse of the castle itself, and the prince realized the curse was feeding off fear, expanding beyond its original bounds. Briar Rose stepped forward, raising her voice. "This ends now!" The words seemed to ripple outward, cutting through the unnatural hum. The shadows recoiled slightly, but the force of centuries-old magic was not so easily banished. Tendrils of darkness shot toward them, snaking along the ground and walls, lashing with intent to harm. The prince lunged, slicing through the creeping shadows with precise strikes, while Briar Rose focused on the energy she had discovered within herself, the same warmth and light that had destroyed the castle's heart. She extended her hands, pushing outward, and a brilliant wave of golden light erupted, colliding with the shadows. The villagers screamed, some falling to their knees, as the darkness hissed and writhed, forced back by the intensity of Briar Rose's newfound power. When the light faded, the square was silent. Shadows had receded, though faint tendrils lingered like scars on the cobblestones. The villagers blinked, confused, and slowly returned to themselves, unaware of what had almost consumed them. Briar Rose collapsed into the prince's arms, exhausted, realizing that awakening had unleashed more than her own life. It had stirred the remnants of a curse that had slept for a century. The prince helped her stand. "We've survived, but this is only the beginning," he said grimly. The darkness doesn't end with the castle, it follows wherever you go. Briar Rose shivered, knowing he was right. The world outside the castle had been changed forever, and the horrors of the past had come alive in ways she could not yet fully understand. The curse, it seemed, had grown hungry. The village square had returned to an uneasy calm, but Briar Rose could feel the lingering pulse of darkness pressing at the edges of her mind. Every shadow now seemed to whisper her name, a reminder that the curse was not finished with her. The prince led her away from the square, guiding her toward the outskirts of the village where the forest began, believing that answers might lie hidden among the ruins and forgotten histories of the kingdom. As they walked, Briar Rose's thoughts raced. The spindle, the castle, the hedge, all were pieces of a puzzle that stretched far beyond the century of slumber she had endured. "Why did this happen to me?" she murmured, almost afraid of the answer. The prince squeezed her hand reassuringly. Because the curse was never just about sleep. It's tied to something older, something far darker than a king's folly or a jealous fairy. Their path led them to a crumbling stone chapel, long abandoned, overgrown with ivy and moss. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay, and dust motes danced in the shafts of pale light that pierced the broken roof. Ancient carvings adorned the walls, depicting women, men, and children intertwined with thorned vines, their expressions twisted in fear and awe. Briar Rose shivered. The chapel felt alive, aware of their presence, as though it had been waiting for them. In the center, a stone pedestal held a tattered book, bound in cracked black leather. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age, but the ink remained dark, depicting symbols that seemed to writhe under her gaze. Briar Rose reached out, her fingers brushing the surface, and the moment she did, the whispers returned, not faint now, but urgent, insistent. The shadows of the chapel flickered across the walls, coalescing into shapes that resembled figures from her dreams, past princesses, cursed knights, and the countless innocents ensnared by the castle's magic. The prince knelt beside her. "This is it," he said. "This book, it holds the history of the curse, its origins, and perhaps how to end it once and for all." As they turned the fragile pages, the story unfolded. Centuries ago, a powerful sorceress had woven a spell of vengeance into the heart of the kingdom. Her hatred had been directed at the royal line, punishing them for perceived betrayals and injustices. The magic was bound to the land, the castle, and the royal heirs, ensuring that each generation would face the consequences of her wrath. The spindle, the hedge, the castle's dark heart, all were manifestations of her will, designed to test courage, obedience, and desire, but also to consume those who dared defy her. Briar Rose's eyes widened. "It's more than just a curse on me, it's on everyone, on the kingdom itself. This magic is alive." The prince nodded grimly. "And now that you've awakened, it's active again. That's why the villagers were affected, why the shadows followed us. If we don't understand it fully, it will continue to spread, stronger than before." Briar Rose's hands trembled as she closed the book gently. The whispers subsided for the moment, but she knew they were only gathering strength, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. The path ahead was clear. To end the curse, they would have to uncover the full history of the sorceress and confront the source of the darkness itself, a perilous journey into the deepest, most forbidden corners of the kingdom. With a deep breath, Briar Rose looked at the prince, determination settling into her gaze. "Then we face it," she said. "No more running, no more hiding. We end this together." The shadows outside the chapel seemed to twitch at her words, as if acknowledging the challenge. The forest thickened as Briar Rose and the prince made their way toward the ancient ruins whispered about in old village tales. The path was barely visible, overgrown, with twisted roots and thorny brambles that seemed to shiver in anticipation. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps, every snap of a twig a warning. Briar Rose could feel the shadows of the castle lingering in the corners of her vision, reminding her that the curse was not confined to walls or thorns it followed, insidious and patient. "The ruins are close," the prince said, his voice steady but cautious. Legends speak of a temple hidden deep in the forest, where the sorceress first channeled her power. If we understand what was done there, we might finally break the curse completely. Stone pillars jutted skyward like broken teeth, carved with runes that seemed to writhe under the dim forest light. Crumbled walls formed jagged corridors, and the ground was littered with bones, both animal and human, some half buried, some clearly left as warnings. Briar Rose shuddered. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the hum of magic thrummed in her ears, a low vibration that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the ancient sorceress herself. They stepped cautiously into the ruins, and immediately, shadows began to rise. Dark figures, half-formed, half-mist, moved along the walls, their hollow eyes fixed upon the princess. Whispers filled the air, voices of centuries past, cursed princes, lost servants, and victims of the hedge's wrath. "You are not welcome," they hissed, circling closer with an almost liquid grace. The prince raised his sword. "Stay close to me," he said. "Don't let them touch you." But Briar Rose felt a strange pull toward the shadows, as if they were calling her name, testing her resolve. She clenched her fists, summoning the warmth within her, the light that had destroyed the castle's curse and repelled the village shadows. Slowly, the figures recoiled, whispering curses that fell short against her growing strength. At the center of the ruins stood an altar, cracked and blackened with centuries of ritual. Upon it lay an obsidian mirror, jagged and jaggedly beautiful. Briar Rose recognized it immediately from the visions she had during her sleep. The sorceress had used it as a conduit, amplifying her power across the land. The mirror pulsed faintly, as if breathing, and the whispers grew louder, frantic, angry. "This is it," Briar Rose said, voice trembling. "This is where it all began." She stepped forward, placing her hand on the mirror. A shock ran through her, not painful, but electric visions of the past flashed before her eyes. The sorceress crafting the spindle, the hedge forming around the castle, every act of cruelty woven into the curse. The shadows surged again, but Briar Rose held firm, drawing strength from the knowledge that she now understood the origin of the darkness. The prince joined her side, holding her steady. "Together," he said, "we end this." Briar Rose nodded, summoning all her courage. The ruins seemed to respond, the air thickening with the anticipation of confrontation. Somewhere deep within the mirror, the sorceress's essence stirred, aware that her centuries-old grip on the kingdom was being challenged. And in that moment, Briar Rose realized, breaking the curse would demand more than courage. It would demand the confrontation of the darkest, most unrelenting force she had ever faced. The obsidian mirror pulsed beneath Briar Rose's hand, its surface swirling with black smoke and shards of reflected light. Shadows twisted violently around the ruins, as if the sorceress herself had risen to defend her creation. A cold, piercing wind cut through the clearing, carrying a voice that slithered into their ears, seductive and cruel. "So, the princess awakens," it hissed, "and the prince dares to follow. Do you think mere mortals can undo what centuries have perfected?" Briar Rose felt her blood run cold. The voice was everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the ruins, bouncing off broken stone and jagged pillars. Her grip tightened on the mirror, a mixture of fear and defiance coursing through her veins. The prince stood beside her, sword raised, eyes scanning for any physical form of the voice. "It can't touch you if we stand together," he said firmly, but his knuckles whitened around the hilt. The shadows surged forward, forming a massive, shifting figure, tall, cloaked in darkness, with hands that ended in shards of black crystal. Eyes that burned like molten gold pierced Briar Rose's soul. This was the sorceress, or at least the echo of her ancient essence, tethered to the curse she had cast so long ago. "Why do you resist?" the figure demanded, each word slicing through the air like a blade. "Do you not feel the threads of fate that bind you to my design? The hedge, the spindle, the sleep, all of it flows from me?" Briar Rose's vision blurred with memories not her own. Centuries of anguish, of princes lost, of innocent lives claimed by thorns and shadows. She felt the weight of the curse pressing down, a suffocating force that threatened to drag her into eternal darkness. Her breath came in short gasps, and for a moment, doubt crept into her heart. Could she truly undo what had endured for generations? Then, she remembered the warmth she had discovered during her awakening, the pulse of life that had repelled the castle's shadows and saved the village. Summoning it, she placed both hands on the mirror. Light burst forth, golden and blinding, wrapping her in a cocoon of heat and strength. The sorceress screamed, a sound like grinding stone and shattering glass, as the figure recoiled, its edges cracking and splintering. The prince stepped forward, striking with his sword at the shadows that still clung to the ruins. The shards of darkness exploded into mist, dissipating into the wind. "Hold on!" he shouted to Briar Rose. "Push it back! Push it out!" Briar. Rose closed her eyes, focusing on the golden light flowing from her core, imagining it consuming every fragment of the sorceress's curse. The mirror began to crack, thin lines running across its surface, and the shadows shrieked, writhing in panic. Slowly, inexorably, the darkness began to collapse, drawn into the heart of the mirror as if devouring itself. Finally, with a deafening crack that echoed across the ruins, the mirror shattered, scattering black shards into the wind. The shadows vanished completely, leaving only the ruins, silent and still under the sun's pale light. Briar Rose sank to her knees, trembling, and the prince knelt beside her, wrapping her in a protective embrace. "We did it," he whispered. "The curse, it's broken." Briar Rose looked up at the ruins, knowing the darkness was gone, but the echoes of its terror would linger forever in her mind. The sorceress had been defeated, but her legacy, the centuries of fear and death, would remain a scar on the kingdom for generations to come. The ruins lay silent under the midday sun, but Briar Rose could feel the weight of centuries pressing upon her. Even though the curse had been shattered, its echoes lingered like faint scars on the land. The forest seemed calmer now, yet the trees still whispered in low, mournful tones, and the wind carried the faint scent of smoke and decay. Briar Rose shivered, realizing that darkness leaves traces long after it is gone. The prince helped her to her feet, steadying her trembling form. "We should return to the village," he said. "The curse affected more than just the forest and the castle. People, places, there may be damage we cannot yet see." As they made their way back, the villagers emerged cautiously from their homes, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. They whispered among themselves, speaking of nightmares that had haunted them even after the shadows disappeared, of fleeting visions of thorns and dark figures, lurking at the edges of their vision. Briar Rose felt a pang of guilt. Though she had defeated the sorceress's essence, she realized that victory did not erase suffering, it merely halted its continuation. The prince guided her to the village square, now bathed in golden sunlight. The fountain, once blackened with curse and sludge, now sparkled clear, reflecting the sky. Flowers had begun to sprout where shadows had once lingered, delicate blossoms reclaiming what had been tainted. Briar Rose knelt and touched the soft petals, letting their warmth remind her that life persists even after darkness. Yet, not all was restored. Houses bore scorch marks where shadows had scraped against walls. Livestock remained missing, and some villagers still trembled, unable to shake the terror they had experienced. Briar Rose realized that the curse had not only threatened life, but had permanently altered the hearts and minds of those it touched. Even with the sorceress defeated, her influence remained embedded in the memories and fears of the people. Seeking answers, Briar Rose and the prince visited the village elder, a frail woman with eyes sharp as hawks. "The curse is broken," she said, "but its history cannot be erased. The kingdom carries the weight of what was done here, and it will take generations to heal fully. Even now, the stories linger, warning others of the dangers that once ruled these lands." Briar Rose nodded, understanding that some legacies cannot simply be destroyed. "Then we must make sure the story is remembered properly," she said. "Not just the part about the sleep or the thorns, but the truth, the pain, the darkness, and how it was overcome, so that the next generation knows both the danger and the courage it takes to face it." The prince placed a hand on her shoulder, smiling softly. "You've endured more than anyone else could have, Rose. You've faced death, darkness, and the weight of fate itself. The kingdom owes its survival to you." Briar Rose looked around at the recovering village and the forest slowly reclaiming its peace. The curse had left scars, yes, but it had also revealed the strength within her. She realized that being awake, truly awake, meant facing the consequences of her past, the shadows of history, and the responsibilities that came with defeating them. As the sun dipped low, casting long, golden shadows across the village, Briar Rose took a deep breath, knowing that while the curse may have ended, the journey of healing and understanding had only just begun. The castle, once a fortress of shadow and thorns, now stood silent, its towering walls scarred from centuries of dark enchantments. Briar Rose and the prince approached cautiously, knowing that while the curse had been broken, remnants of ancient magic often lingered, where bloodlines intersected with power. Each stone seemed to hum faintly beneath her touch, a reminder that the castle itself remembered the deeds and misdeeds of its past. Inside, the throne room was in ruins, dust thick on the floors, shattered tapestries hanging like spectral curtains. The prince held a lantern, casting flickering light across the room, while Briar Rose's gaze swept over the faded portraits of kings and queens long dead. Something about them made her uneasy. Their eyes seemed to follow her, whispering secrets she could not yet decipher. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice echoing softly. The curse was powerful, yes, but it was also very specific. It targeted me, our lineage, and the castle itself. There has to be more. Something about my family that drew it. The prince nodded. Curses like this rarely strike at random. Often, they latch onto bloodlines, histories, unresolved injustices. If the sorceress sought revenge or power, she must have had a reason beyond mere spite. We need to uncover what it is, or the kingdom may remain vulnerable. Briar Rose walked to the oldest portrait, a queen with eyes that mirrored her own. Her fingers traced the painted surface. In a whisper, almost to herself, she said, "What did she do to deserve this?" A sudden gust of wind blew through the broken windows, scattering dust across the room. Briar Rose felt a chill run down her spine, and then a low hum began to fill the air. It was subtle at first, like the vibration of a distant drum, then grew louder, as if the walls themselves were responding to her presence. Shadows gathered in corners, moving independently of light, forming shapes she recognized from her dreams. Long-forgotten ancestors, their expressions grave, their hands outstretched as though urging her to see what had been hidden. At the far end of the room, a hidden alcove revealed itself previously concealed behind a tattered tapestry. Inside, ancient scrolls lay in disarray, brittle and yellowed. Briar Rose carefully opened one, revealing genealogical records, letters, and mystical notations. Her eyes widened as she realized the documents detailed the interactions between her family and the sorceress, spanning generations. Each ruler had unknowingly crossed paths with the dark magic, creating threads that intertwined with her fate. This is it," Briar Rose whispered. "Every generation, there was someone who failed to heed the warnings. That's why the curse persisted. Not just my awakening, it's the history, the patterns of the past. We've only broken the latest link." The prince placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we must continue, Rose. There's more to learn if we are to ensure the kingdom and your bloodline is safe. The castle holds answers, even if it guards them jealously." Briar Rose nodded, determination settling over her like armor. She had faced sleep, shadows, and death itself, and now she would face the legacy of her lineage. The throne room, scarred and silent, seemed to acknowledge her resolve, the shadows retreating, slightly, as if giving her permission to seek the truth. With lantern in hand and scrolls gathered, Briar Rose and the prince descended into the castle's lower halls. The journey into the kingdom's hidden history had begun, and with it came the first hints of truths darker than any curse, a darkness that had survived centuries and now stirred again. The castle's lower halls were colder, darker, and more oppressive than any room Briar Rose had encountered. The air was thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of age-old magic. Shadows clung to the corners like living things, whispering secrets in voices she could barely comprehend. The prince held the lantern high, illuminating the cracked stone walls, but even its light seemed swallowed by the oppressive gloom. This place, Briar Rose murmured. "It feels like it's been waiting for us." The prince nodded grimly. "Every castle has secrets, but this one, I've never felt anything like this. The curse may be broken, but the magic remains." Buried in the stones themselves, they walked cautiously along the narrow corridor until they reached an iron-bound door, partially hidden behind a fallen tapestry. Strange symbols were etched into the metal, glowing faintly as Briar Rose approached. The air vibrated with energy, and her skin prickled as if invisible eyes were watching. She reached out and traced the runes with her fingers. The moment her touch met the metal, a chill raced up her arm. The door shuddered, groaned, and slowly creaked open, revealing a chamber bathed in an eerie silver light. Inside, countless artifacts rested upon pedestals and shelves, spindles twisted with black iron, broken mirrors reflecting shadows rather than light, and books bound in cracked leather, their pages filled with words that seemed to writhe on their own. Briar Rose's breath caught in her throat. This is the source of the sorceress's power," she whispered. "She didn't just curse the castle, she built it as a storehouse for her magic, waiting for someone to awaken her legacy." The prince stepped forward, eyes wide with awe and caution. And these artifacts, if she were alive, even in spirit, they would obey her. As Briar Rose examined a spindle, she noticed a faint glow emanating from its tip. She recoiled instinctively, but then a memory surfaced from her century-long sleep. The prick of the spindle, the darkness that had claimed her. Her hands shook. "This is the same type of spindle, the one that started it all. We must be careful. If these are even fragments of her original power, touching them could awaken her essence again." A sudden gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the lantern's flame. Shadows surged, forming the sorceress's face in the darkness, twisted, angry, and impossibly real. "You dare enter my sanctuary?" the voice hissed, echoing off the stone walls. "After centuries of slumber, you think you can undo me?" Briar Rose felt the pull of fear, but also a surge of determination. "We've come this far," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "You may have lingered in these walls, but your time is over. We will uncover your secrets and destroy your hold over this kingdom." The shadows recoiled, and the artifacts trembled as if aware of her defiance. Briar Rose turned to the prince. "We must gather what we need and leave. Every second here strengthens her presence. If we hesitate..." The prince nodded, taking her hand. Together they began to carefully collect the most dangerous items, knowing that the chamber held both the key to understanding the curse and the risk of awakening the sorceress's wrath once more. Every step was a test of courage, every shadow a reminder that the past was never truly dead. The forbidden chamber seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Every artifact they gathered thrummed with energy, and Briar Rose could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. The farther they ventured, the stronger the pull of the sorceress's presence became, whispering doubts and fears into her mind. The prince gripped her hand tightly, a silent reminder that she was not alone, but the darkness was cunning it sought to divide, to weaken resolve before striking. At the chamber's center stood a pedestal unlike any other. Atop, it rested a crystal orb, dark as obsidian, yet within its depths a flickering light swirled like a storm. Briar Rose instinctively recognized it, the sorceress's heart of power, the vessel through which her will had commanded the castle, the thorns, and the curse itself. The shadows in the chamber writhed, forming shapes of men and women, all twisted by centuries of servitude to the dark magic. Their eyes, hollow and desperate, bore into Briar Rose. "She will not forgive your intrusion," one whispered, the voice barely audible over the hum of the orb. "Touch it, and you are lost." Briar Rose drew a shaky breath. "We have to understand it," she said. "If we destroy it recklessly, the curse may scatter into the kingdom instead of ending. We need to confront it fully." The prince placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we face it together." Steeling herself, Briar Rose reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the orb, a surge of visions slammed into her mind. She saw the sorceress in life, a woman of formidable beauty, her gaze cold and calculating, weaving spells into the very air around her. She witnessed the birth of the curse, the raising of the hedge, the countless lives twisted in pain and fear. She saw herself asleep in the tower, the prince kneeling beside her, and centuries of suffering compressed into moments. The orb pulsed violently, and the chamber shook. Shadows converged, forming the sorceress's full apparition, towering, ethereal, and impossibly real. "You dare touch the heart of my Pram." "Power?" the figure hissed, voice echoing through every corner. "You are mine, as are all who have defied me." Briar Rose felt the pull of the orb, an almost physical tug at her soul. Memories of the past century, her imprisonment, the fear, the loneliness, threatened to overwhelm her. She faltered, trembling. But then, she remembered the warmth that had saved her before, the courage that had carried her through the castle, through the curse, and into the prince's arms. "I am not yours," she whispered, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You do not control me. You do not control the kingdom. You are a shadow of the past, and I am the dawn." The orb reacted violently, flaring with light so bright it threatened to blind them. The shadows screamed, writhing in pain, as the sorceress's essence recoiled. Briar Rose felt the darkness trying to claw into her mind, but she held firm, drawing on every ounce of courage and life within her. The prince raised his sword and struck the orb with a forceful blow, shattering the crystal into shards that scattered across the chamber. The sorceress screamed, a sound that shook the stone walls, then vanished, leaving only silence. The shadows collapsed, dissolving into nothingness. Briar Rose sank to her knees, heart pounding, the weight of centuries lifting. The chamber was still, the orb destroyed, and the heart of darkness finally silenced. The forbidden chamber was silent now, the oppressive weight of the sorceress's presence gone. Briar Rose slowly stood, brushing dust from her clothes, and glanced around at the scattered shards of the shattered crystal orb. The air felt lighter, almost alive, as though the very stones of the castle had exhaled a century-long breath of relief. Yet the room still held secrets, treasures, and knowledge, long hidden by the dark magic that had bound it. The prince moved carefully among the broken artifacts, eyes scanning for anything that could provide insight into the kingdom's past. "We've destroyed her heart," he said quietly, "but there may still be answers here. Records of what she did, why she cursed this castle, and how it all began." Briar Rose nodded, her eyes drawn to a series of tall shelves at the back of the chamber. Scrolls, books, and bundles of parchment were stacked haphazardly, some rotting with age, others surprisingly intact. Carefully, she pulled one from the shelf, its leather cover cracked but intact. Dust filled the air as she opened it, revealing elegant script, diagrams of spells, and annotations in a precise, sharp hand. "These are journals," she murmured. "Her writings, her planning, even the records of every curse she placed. This is the proof of everything, the thorns, the sleep, the castle's defenses." She chronicled it all. As they sifted through the documents, a horrifying picture emerged. The sorceress had not acted on whim alone. Her curses were the culmination of centuries of grievances, aimed at the royal line for generations. Each king and queen had unknowingly contributed to her power, their actions, fears, and mistakes feeding the dark magic. Briar Rose realized that the curse had been a living entity, sustained not just by her own bloodline, but by the repeated cycles of fear and suffering in the kingdom. Among the scrolls, she discovered maps of the castle's secret passages, hidden chambers, and concealed treasures. One map led to a subterranean vault beneath the throne room, rumored to contain relics of the kingdom's earliest rulers. The prince traced the path with his finger. "If this is real, there may be knowledge and artifacts here that could strengthen the kingdom and protect it from any lingering magic." Briar Rose felt a mixture of excitement and dread. Or there may be dangers we cannot yet imagine. The sorceress anticipated this discovery. She knew that someone would eventually come to uncover her secrets. These passages, these relics, they were traps as much as treasures. They gathered the most important scrolls and notes, carefully avoiding unstable artifacts. As Briar Rose placed the last scroll into her bag, the chamber seemed to sigh again, as though acknowledging her courage and restraint. She looked at the prince, determination in her eyes. "We have the knowledge now. We can rebuild, protect the kingdom, and finally break the cycle that has haunted our family for centuries." The prince smiled, a mixture of relief and admiration. "Then let's begin. The castle, the village, and the kingdom, they all depend on what we do next. We've survived the darkness, Rose. Now we have the chance to bring true light." As they exited the chamber, the sun's rays pierced the broken windows, illuminating the ruins with golden light. For the first time in centuries, the castle felt less like a prison and more like a place of potential. The shadows of the past had been faced, and the path to the future, uncertain though it was, stretched out before them, waiting to be reclaimed. The castle buzzed with an energy it hadn't felt in centuries. Briar Rose and the prince walked through the halls, now partially restored, as workers, craftsmen, and villagers began repairing damage caused by the curse. Broken stones were reset, shattered windows replaced, and gardens slowly reclaimed their former splendor. Yet Briar Rose knew that rebuilding the physical structure was only part of the battle. The kingdom's spirit, scarred by fear and darkness, would take far longer to heal. "This castle will never be the same," Briar Rose murmured, touching a wall scarred with old burn marks. "The darkness left its mark, and even with the curse gone, people will remember. They'll be cautious, fearful." The prince nodded. "Fear lingers, but so does hope. You've brought both to the kingdom. And now, with the knowledge we recovered, we can protect it from anything that tries to rise from the shadows again." Briar Rose glanced at the scrolls she had brought from the forbidden chamber. Among them were detailed accounts of the sorceress's magic, the origins of her curses, and warnings about residual spells hidden throughout the castle and surrounding lands. Some passages described enchantments so subtle that they could have remained unnoticed for centuries, waiting for an unsuspecting victim. "We need to locate these remaining threats and neutralize them," Briar Rose said, determination sharpening her voice. "The castle and the kingdom cannot be fully safe until every trace of her influence is gone." They began their work immediately, combing through secret passages, examining hidden rooms, and using the prince's sword and Briar Rose's newfound understanding of magic to dismantle residual spells. Some rooms were eerily silent, while others contained whispers of the past echoes of servants and villagers trapped in nightmares from centuries ago. Briar Rose often paused, listening to the faint cries, feeling the weight of lives affected by the curse. Each spell undone felt like a small release, a gesture of justice for those long forgotten. As night fell, the castle took on a strange ethereal glow. Lanterns flickered with light that seemed almost alive, casting moving shadows across walls and floors. Briar Rose felt a presence watchful, wary, but no longer threatening. It was as if the castle itself had recognized her courage, granting her a silent partnership in restoring its integrity. In the grand hall, they held a council with the village leaders and remaining nobles. Briar Rose spoke with a mixture of humility and authority, sharing what they had discovered and instructing the villagers on how to recognize lingering magic. Some were skeptical, others fearful, but all understood the gravity of her words. Knowledge, she explained, was the true defense against darkness. That evening, as Briar Rose and the prince stood on the balcony overlooking the slowly restoring kingdom, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "We've faced death, darkness, and curses," she said softly, "and survived. But the kingdom is fragile. We must remain vigilant." The prince wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We will. Together, we've endured the shadows of the past. Now we guard the light." Briar Rose looked toward the horizon, where the first stars began to pierce the night sky. Though darkness had lingered for centuries, she realized that courage, wisdom, and love could endure far longer, and that the story of Sleeping Beauty was far from over. Even as the castle recovered, the kingdom's village bore the scars of centuries of dark enchantment. Briar Rose and the prince had hoped that destroying the sorceress's heart of power would erase every trace of the curse, But as they walked through the cobblestone streets, it became clear that darkness had left a deeper imprint. Houses were crumbling, fields overgrown, and a pervasive unease hung over the villagers, as though the very air remembered fear. "Something lingers here," Briar Rose murmured, eyes scanning the narrow alleys. The villagers watched her warily, suspicion and fear etched into their faces. Many had grown up hearing tales of the cursed princess and the doomed castle, stories that had shaped generations. Even after her awakening, remnants of those tales still held power, twisting minds and hearts. A shrill cry echoed from a nearby alley. Briar Rose and the prince rushed toward it, finding a young girl crouched in the shadows, her eyes wide with terror. "What is it?" Briar Rose asked gently. They move at night," the girl whispered, trembling. "Figures without faces, whispering my name. They vanish when I look, but I can feel them watching." The prince's jaw tightened. Residual magic. The sorceress didn't just curse the castle. Her influence seeped into the Fland village. It's possible some of her spells adapted, feeding off fear, becoming sentient. Briar Rose knelt beside the girl, taking her hands. "You are safe now. We'll find them and make them powerless. No one should live in fear because of what she left behind." Their search led them through the village and into the bordering forest, a place long whispered about in fearful tones. Shadows twisted unnaturally among the trees, forming shapes that seemed human, then monstrous, then dissolved into mist. The air smelled faintly of iron and decay, a reminder that the curse had claimed countless lives in centuries past. Briar Rose could feel the magic here, cold and calculating, like a predator circling. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a figure, a faceless woman draped in tattered robes. She reached toward Briar Rose, hands stretching impossibly long. "Leave or join us," a distorted voice hissed. Briar Rose raised a hand, drawing on the knowledge from the forbidden chamber. Whispering an incantation she had read in the sorceress's own writings, she summoned a circle of light around herself and the prince. The figure recoiled, shrieking. As the light burned through the lingering magic, the shadows quivered, twisted, and finally dissipated, leaving only a cold wind that whispered through the trees. The girl from the village gasped, eyes wide with awe. You saved us," she breathed. Briar Rose nodded, though she felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. "This is only the beginning. The castle's curse was powerful, but remnants of it exist everywhere it touched. We must cleanse them all." As they returned to the village, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets. Briar Rose realized that even in victory, darkness could never be fully erased. It only retreated. But with courage, knowledge, and vigilance, the kingdom could withstand it. The prince squeezed her hand. "We've faced centuries of shadows, Rose, and we've survived. Whatever remains, we face it together." Briar Rose looked to the horizon, the forest looming behind them. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she felt hope stir in the shadows. Briar Rose and the prince had thought the sorceress's power destroyed, her heart of darkness shattered, and the residual magic dispersed. Yet as they journeyed through the outskirts of the kingdom, rumors began to surface, vague whispers of cloaked figures gathering under the cover of night, chanting incantations long thought lost. The villagers spoke of strange fires in the forest, eerie lights dancing over the treetops, and shadows moving with a purpose that suggested intelligence, not mere trickery. "It seems the curse's influence wasn't entirely contained," Briar Rose said, eyes narrowing. "Some must be trying to preserve or even resurrect her power." The prince tightened his grip on his sword. "We cannot allow that. Not after everything we've faced." Following the trail of rumors, they discovered a hidden valley shrouded in mist, where twisted trees grew close together like the fingers of some ancient hand. There, in the dim glow of lanterns, a gathering of hooded figures chanted in a language Briar Rose recognized from the sorceress's journals, a tongue of old magic, potent and dangerous. "They call themselves the Sect of Shadows," Briar Rose whispered, voice trembling with unease. "Devotees who survived the curse, guarding her secrets, and hoping to bring her back. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a woman draped in black, her face concealed by a veil. Her voice, melodic yet icy, echoed through the valley. "The princess awakens, and yet the power you destroyed is but a fragment. We shall see if your courage withstands what we have preserved." Briar Rose felt a chill crawl up her spine. She glanced at the prince, who nodded firmly. Together, they stepped forward, revealing themselves to the sect. The hooded figures recoiled, surprised by their boldness. "You seek to resurrect her," Briar Rose called, voice unwavering. "You will not succeed. Her power ended with her heart. Any attempt to revive her will bring ruin upon you all." The leader laughed, a sound that carried a chill deeper than the forest's night air. "You misunderstand. She is not gone. Her essence lingers, and with the proper rites, we can bring her fully back into the world. And you, princess, will be the key. Your blood, your memories, they are the final component." Briar Rose's heart raced. The sect's plan was clear. They intended to exploit her very life force to restore the sorceress. Every lesson she had learned, every artifact she had destroyed, and every shadow she had faced had led to this confrontation. She drew upon the magic she had studied in the Forbidden Chamber, forming a protective barrier of light around herself and the prince. The hooded figures surged forward, chanting with renewed intensity, shadows twisting into serpentine forms, reaching for the protective circle. Briar Rose felt the pull, the seductive call of the sorceress's power, promising dominion and knowledge beyond imagining, but at the cost of everything she held dear. "No!" she cried, focusing all her will. "I will not let you control me. I will not allow her return." The valley shook as the clash of magic erupted a brilliant storm of light and darkness. Briar Rose's protective circle burned bright, repelling the sect and scattering the shadows, but the leader's voice lingered, a promise of danger yet to come. When the valley fell silent, the sect of shadows had vanished, leaving only traces of their dark magic. Briar Rose and the prince stood together, breathless, knowing this was only the beginning of a far greater battle. The sorceress's legacy was not yet fully ended. The valley lay silent, shrouded in mist, but Briar Rose could feel the lingering pulse of dark magic beneath the earth. The sect of shadows had vanished, but their presence was etched into the very soil, a warning that the sorceress's influence had not been eradicated. Briar Rose and the prince returned to the castle, determined to study the scrolls and journals they had recovered. Among the faded ink and ancient symbols, a single passage stood out, a description of a ritual, one capable of reviving the sorceress fully, not as a shadow or fragment, but in corporeal form. "The ritual of shadows," Briar Rose whispered, her fingers tracing the arcane symbols. This is what they were trying to complete in the forest." The prince's eyes darkened with worry. "If they succeed, the curse could return in full, stronger than ever. We cannot allow it." Briar Rose nodded, her mind racing. The ritual required 4 components: blood from the line of the princess, a shard of the Heart of Power, the presence of the eldest descendants of the sorceress's loyal followers, and a site of great magical convergence. They already possessed one, the shard from the destroyed orb, but the rest was unknown, likely scattered and hidden for centuries. "We need to find them before they can act," Briar Rose said. "If the sect gathers all the pieces, the kingdom will fall into darkness again." Their first task led them to the village, where Briar Rose sought the eldest villagers who remembered the tales of the curse in their youth. Through whispered conversations and careful questioning, they discovered hints of a hidden enclave deep within the forest, descendants of the sorceress's followers, guardians of forbidden knowledge, each sworn to secrecy over generations. As night fell, Briar Rose and the prince ventured into the forest, guided by faintly glowing sigils inscribed on trees and stones. The air grew colder with every step, and shadows seemed to watch, slithering along the past ground, twisting into shapes that made their hearts pound. Eventually, they came upon a circle of ancient stones, etched with sigils matching those in the ritual text. From the darkness emerged figures cloaked in black, faces hidden, their hands raised in chants older than memory. Briar Rose felt the pull of their magic immediately, a cold, insistent force tugging at her blood and memories. "So you've found us," the leader intoned, voice hollow and echoing, "but you cannot stop what is already in motion. The ritual of shadows will be completed, and the sorceress shall walk the earth again." Briar Rose stepped forward, the shard of the orb glowing in her palm. "Not while I breathe. You have underestimated the courage of those who have endured your darkness. You will not succeed." The air vibrated with power as the sect advanced, shadows twisting into monstrous forms. Briar Rose summoned her knowledge and courage, drawing a protective circle of light. The prince unsheathed his sword, its steel gleaming, ready to strike. The forest erupted in a clash of magic and steel, the night alive with crackling energy. Briar Rose realized that this confrontation was more than a battle. It was a test of will, knowledge, and heart. The ritual could not be allowed to continue, yet the sect would not yield easily. Every ounce of her strength, and every lesson learned from the cursed castle and the shattered orb, would be needed to survive the coming night. The night air was thick with the scent of ozone and burned wood as Briar Rose and the prince faced the sect of shadows. The circle of ancient stones trembled, pulsing with energy as if the very earth beneath them feared the confrontation. The leader of the sect emerged from the darkness, taller than any human, eyes glowing like molten gold behind the veil that hid her face. "You are brave," the leader said, her voice a chilling melody that carried through the forest. "But bravery alone will not save you. The sorceress's power is eternal, woven into the threads of this world. You cannot stop what is already begun." Briar Rose clenched the shard of the orb, feeling its energy pulse against her palm. Her power was never eternal. "You are clinging to shadows, relics of a life that is gone. I will not let her rise again." The ground shook as the leader extended her arms, and shadows erupted from the forest floor, twisting into serpentine forms that lunged at Briar Rose and the prince. The prince swung his sword, cutting through the writhing dark, while Briar Rose traced a complex sigil in the air, summoning a barrier of radiant light that pushed back the encroaching magic. Sparks flew where shadow met light, the night alive with the hum of clashing energy. "You are strong," the leader hissed, advancing, "but your heart carries fear. Fear feeds the shadows, and soon they will devour all that you love." Briar Rose's eyes burned with determination. She remembered the cursed castle, the thorns, the centuries of suffering. She remembered the journals, the spells, the courage it had taken to survive each trial. "Fear is no longer my master," she shouted. "The darkness belongs to the past. Your time is over." With a surge of power, she slammed the shard of the orb to the ground. It exploded in blinding light, sending a shockwave that knocked the sect off balance. The shadows shrieked, dissolving into the night, as if burned away by the intensity of her will. The leader staggered, screaming in frustration, her voice warped and echoing, "You cannot." But Briar Rose stepped forward, the shard now glowing like a miniature sun. "I am not alone," she said, taking the prince's hand. "We face this together, and together we will end your darkness." The leader lunged, but Briar Rose channeled every fragment of her knowledge and courage, summoning a circle of light that trapped the sect leader within. The shard pulsed violently. With a final, ear-splitting scream, the shadows tore themselves apart, the leader's form dissolving into mist that scattered with the wind. Silence fell. The forest, once alive with shadows, now seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The ancient stones dimmed, their energy spent, their magic cleansed. Briar Rose dropped to her knees, exhausted, but the prince held her, steadying her with a comforting grip. "We did it," he whispered. "The leader is gone. The ritual stopped. The kingdom is safe, at least for now." Briar Rose looked up at the moonlit sky, heart still racing, the weight of the battle pressing on her. "For now," she echoed. She knew the darkness had left its mark, and while this battle was won, the lessons of courage, vigilance, and love would guide her for the challenges still to come. Even after the sect of shadows was vanquished, Briar Rose knew the battle was not yet truly over. The sorceress's power had been cunning, pervasive, and patient. Shadows might have been defeated in the forest, but remnants of her influence could still linger in the far corners of the kingdom. Hidden spells, cursed objects, and secret talismans that could reignite the darkness. Briar Rose and the prince resolved to track down every fragment before it could be used again. Their first lead came from an old scholar in a distant village, who spoke of enchanted mirrors that had once belonged to the sorceress. "These mirrors," he whispered, "hold glimpses of her essence. Those who gaze too long are drawn into visions that can corrupt even the strongest of hearts." Many have vanished, unable to resist the whispers within. Determined, Briar Rose and the prince journeyed to the abandoned manor, where the mirrors were said to reside. The building loomed like a specter against the storm-darkened sky, windows black as obsidian. Inside, dust-coated furniture and tattered drapes swayed with the wind that whispered through broken panes. The mirrors stood at odd angles, reflecting not the room, but the deepest fears and desires of anyone who looked into them. Briar Rose approached cautiously, feeling the pull of the magic as if the mirrors could reach inside her mind. She remembered the warnings in the sorceress's journals and steeled herself, focusing on her memories of the castle, the prince, and the village, the people and places worth fighting for. One by one, she shattered the mirrors, each crack releasing a wailing echo of dark magic that vanished into the air. But even as the last mirror splintered, a faint shimmer of movement caught her eye. Beneath the floorboards, a small blackened box pulsed with malevolent energy. Briar Rose pried it open, revealing a collection of enchanted objects, a needle, a vial of black liquid, and a fragment of a heart-shaped amulet, the final piece of the sorceress's power. Her stomach twisted. This fragment had been hidden, waiting for centuries, capable of restoring the sorceress entirely if reunited with her essence. The prince stepped beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "We destroy it?" he asked. Briar Rose's gaze hardened. "We destroy it, once and for all. There will be no second chance, no lingering shadows." With a deep breath, she concentrated on the shard of the orb still in her possession. Channeling every ounce of magic, courage, and knowledge she had gained over the centuries, Briar Rose pressed the fragment to the orb. The combination of light and energy erupted violently, illuminating the manor as if the sun itself had entered. The fragment screamed in a voice that was not its own, a wail of fury, grief, and ancient malice before dissolving completely, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air. Silence followed. The oppressive weight of centuries of darkness lifted, leaving the manor eerily calm. Briar Rose collapsed to her knees, exhausted, but the prince caught her. "It's done," he whispered. "The last of her power is gone. We've won." Briar Rose looked to the shattered mirrors and the destroyed objects, heart pounding. "The darkness is gone," she said softly, "but its memory will always remind us of the courage needed to face it." Outside, the storm clouds broke, and the first rays of dawn touched the kingdom. For the first time in generations, a true light settled over the land, promising hope and renewal. Briar Rose knew their fight had been long and harrowing, but the kingdom and its princess was finally free from the shadows of the past. Even as light returned to the kingdom, Briar Rose could not shake a sense of unease. The fragments of the sorceress's power had been destroyed, but something more subtle, more insidious, lingered, a curse tied not to objects or spells, but to her very bloodline. The ancient texts she had studied hinted at it, a final safeguard the sorceress had woven to endure beyond death, a shadow within the lineage of the princess, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Late one night, Briar Rose sat alone in the castle library, poring over old scrolls and journals. The flickering candlelight cast shadows that danced across the walls, making the letters seem to shift and writhe as though alive. One manuscript, bound in dark leather and smelling faintly of decay, revealed a horrifying truth. Any descendant of Briar Rose's line could become a vessel for the sorceress if they ignored the warnings of the magical wards. "The curse is dormant," she murmured, tracing the inked symbols. "But it will awaken. It is tied to life and blood, a tether between the sorceress and my descendants, and it waits, for someone to falter. Suddenly, the room grew cold. The candle flames flickered violently, then dimmed, leaving her in near darkness. Briar Rose's heart thumped. She could feel a presence, an entity born of centuries of malice, whispering through the shadows. Its voice was serpentine, sultry, and cruel. "You may have destroyed my power, princess, but you cannot destroy me. Your blood will call me forth, and I shall rise again." Briar Rose gripped her chest, feeling the weight of the curse. The prince rushed in at the sound of her gasp. "Rose, what is it?" "It's the bloodline," she whispered, trembling. "The sorceress left a part of herself within our family, a fragment that cannot be destroyed by ordinary means. It awakens when her name is spoken, or when her magic senses weakness." The entity materialized in a swirl of shadow, forming a tall, elegant figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing red. "You cannot resist what is in your veins," it hissed. "I have waited centuries for this moment." Briar Rose steadied herself, recalling every spell, every lesson, every ounce of courage that had carried her through the curse. "You do not belong in this world," she said, her voice firm. "You are a remnant of cruelty and death, and I will not let you touch my family or my kingdom." The prince took her hand, adding his strength to hers. "We face this together, as always," he said. The shadow lunged, but Briar Rose drew upon the energy of the orb, now fully integrated into her magic. Light erupted, a pure, blinding force that met the shadow entity. The struggle was immense, a battle of wills more than of strength. She could feel the entity trying to pull at her essence, trying to awaken the darkness within her blood, but Briar Rose's resolve was absolute. With a final defiant cry, she channeled her magic through the prince's support, driving the entity back into the void from which it had lingered. The shadows shrieked, twisting and dissolving until the library was silent once more. Briar Rose sank to the floor, trembling but alive. She had faced the darkness within her very bloodline and survived. The kingdom was safe, and for the first time, she understood the depth of the sorceress's obsession with her line. The battle was far from over, but Briar Rose knew that with courage, love, and vigilance, even the darkest curses could be faced and overcome. The castle, bathed in the soft light of dawn, seemed almost serene, but Briar Rose's unease refused to fade. The shadow of the bloodline curse had been banished, yet whispers from the ancient texts hinted at one final, hidden artifact, an object of such potent dark magic that its discovery could undo all they had fought for. The sorceress had always been meticulous, leaving nothing to chance. If this artifact still existed, its power might be enough to resurrect her fully, unstoppable and wrathful. The scroll suggests it is hidden beneath the ruins of her first stronghold, Briar Rose explained to the prince as they prepared for the journey. A fortress consumed by fire centuries ago, yet magically preserved. There she left a piece of herself, an object to ensure her return. Their journey took them through jagged cliffs and dense forests, where the air was thick with the remnants of old spells. Birds fell silent as they passed, and Briar Rose could feel the pull of the artifact even from miles away. A cold, insistent tug at her spirit, like icy fingers reaching for her soul. At the ruins, the ground was scarred and blackened, as though the earth itself remembered the sorceress's fury. Briar Rose led the way into a crumbling hall, where fire-damaged pillars leaned at impossible angles, and ash floated like ghostly snow through the air. In the center, partially buried beneath rubble, lay a small obsidian box carved with runes she had only ever seen in the darkest of her studies. "This must be it," she whispered, heart hammering. The orb in her hand pulsed in response, almost as if it recognized the artifact as its counterpart. Before she could reach it, the ground trembled. From the shadows, an entity emerged, a guardian of the artifact, summoned by centuries of magic. It was neither fully human nor spirit, a plays, grotesque fusion of both. With elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with malevolent intelligence, its voice was a rasp that resonated in Briar Rose's bones. No mortal shall claim what is mine. Leave now, or be consumed." The prince stepped forward, sword drawn, but Briar Rose held up a hand. She closed her eyes and focused on the lessons learned. The strength of the orb, the power of her bloodline's courage, the bond she shared with the prince. She channeled light from within, a radiant force that met the guardian head-on. Shadows screamed, twisting and recoiling as the magic clash intensified. With a final surge of energy, Briar Rose thrust the orb toward the artifact. The obsidian box cracked, releasing a shockwave of dark energy that dissolved into the air, leaving only a faint, cold whisper behind. The guardian disintegrated with it, leaving the ruins eerily silent. Briar Rose collapsed to her knees, exhausted but resolute. She had destroyed the last known remnant of the sorceress's power, ensuring that no dark magic could rise again from her ruins. The prince knelt beside her, holding her hand. "Is it truly over?" he asked. "For now," Briar Rose said, breathing heavily. "We've broken the chain, destroyed the artifacts, banished the shadows. The sorceress cannot rise again, not from this world, not from this bloodline." Above them, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the ruins. It felt like a promise won, of safety, of hope, and of a future finally free from the sorceress's long shadow. With the hidden artifact destroyed and the bloodline curse broken, Briar Rose felt a fragile sense of peace, but questions still gnawed at her. Who was the sorceress truly? How had her dark power endured for centuries? The journals hinted at secrets far older than any kingdom, secrets entwined with the very foundations of magic itself. Briar Rose and the prince delved into the oldest archives of the castle where cobweb-covered scrolls and forbidden tomes had been hidden away from generations of kings and queens. One brittle manuscript, bound in dragonhide and sealed with black wax, drew Briar Rose's attention. The ink had faded, yet the words remained legible, describing a woman not born of ordinary lineage, but descended from an ancient line of magical entities predating the kingdom itself. She had been trained in the manipulation of shadows, illusions, and life-forging spells from birth. Her power had been nurtured in secret, passed down through clandestine societies that worshipped chaos as a natural force. "The sorceress was no ordinary mortal," Briar Rose whispered, tracing the faded letters. "She was part of a line older than any king, any kingdom. Her magic came from forces beyond this world, tied to the earth, the stars, and the cycles of life and death." The prince leaned over, examining the diagrams of runes and magical sigils that crisscrossed the page. "No wonder she endured," he said quietly. "If her essence was so deeply rooted in the fabric of the world, it explains why she could influence centuries of events, why her shadows lingered even after her death." Briar Rose nodded, a shiver running down her spine. "And it explains the rituals, the artifacts, the bloodline curse. Everything was meant to safeguard her return, to give her enough time to weave her power back into the world. But all of that ends with us. I've destroyed the tools she used to anchor herself to this plane." Even as she spoke, a subtle unease lingered. The manuscript contained references to a hidden nexus, a convergence point of magical energy where the sorceress's power had originated. If it still existed, it could harbor residual energy capable of reviving her essence. Briar Rose realized that their journey was not yet finished. The nexus had to be found and purified, lest remnants of her magic endure. Guided by ancient maps and the faint magical residue she could sense with the orb, Briar Rose and the prince ventured to a secluded valley far beyond the kingdom. Here, the earth pulsed with power, ancient and primordial, as though the land itself remembered the sorceress's presence. Briar Rose knelt, letting her hands hover over the soil, feeling the lingering echoes of the magic that had shaped centuries of fear and legend. "This is it," she murmured, "the source of her power. If we cleanse this, we remove any trace of her influence forever." The prince grasped her hand, his gaze steady. "Together we'll finish this. For the kingdom, for our family, for everyone she ever threatened." Briar Rose inhaled deeply, summoning all the courage, magic, and resolve she possessed. The nexus shimmered before them, alive with shadows of the past, as if the sorceress herself were testing their will. She whispered a single vow: "Your reign of terror ends tonight." Briar Rose and the prince stood at the heart of the valley, the ground beneath them humming with a deep, almost sentient energy. The nexus pulsed with dark light, swirling shadows coalescing into shapes that whispered her name, mocking her, testing her resolve. Centuries of malevolence pressed upon them, threatening to consume every ounce of courage they had. This was the final battlefield, the point where the sorceress's legacy had been anchored to the world, and Briar Rose knew failure was not an option. The prince tightened his grip on her hand. "Whatever happens," he said, "we face it together." Briar Rose nodded, taking a deep breath. She lifted the shard of the orb, now fully attuned to her magic, and directed its radiant light toward the swirling shadows. The nexus screamed in response, voices rising in a cacophony of fury and despair. But Briar Rose held steady, focusing on her bloodline, her kingdom, and the promise of a future free from darkness. "You have lingered too long in this world," she called out, her voice echoing across the valley. "Your shadows will not rise again. You will not touch my family, my people, or my land." The shadows surged forward, lashing out like living tendrils, clawing at her, reaching for the orb. Briar Rose's magic flared, forming a barrier of light that struck the shadows like lightning. The prince swung his sword, cutting through the writhing darkness. But he quickly realized the battle was not against physical foes, it was a war of wills. The nexus pulsed violently, a vortex of light and shadow, threatening to pull them into oblivion. Briar Rose extended her consciousness, feeling the tangled threads of magic that had ensnared generations, threads spun by the sorceress herself. One by one, she unraveled them, dissolving centuries of dark intent into nothingness. The shadows wailed, coiling into a single monstrous figure, the final semblance of the sorceress's power. Its eyes glowed red, a mirror of centuries of hatred, and it lunged at Briar Rose with a shriek that rattled the earth. Summoning every fragment of her courage, she met it with the full force of the orb's light. The brilliance exploded, engulfing the valley, burning away the darkness, purging the lingering curses, and severing the last threads of the sorceress's essence. When the light faded, silence fell, a heavy, absolute quiet. The shadows had vanished. The nexus pulsed softly, now nothing more than a quiet hum of neutral energy. Briar Rose fell to her knees, exhausted but alive. The prince knelt beside her, lifting her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered. "The darkness is gone." Briar Rose looked at the valley, the wind carrying the scent of new life, the sun breaking through clouds that had lingered for centuries. She felt the weight of history lift from her shoulders, a freedom hard-earned and absolute. "It is over," she repeated, a smile breaking through the fatigue. "The kingdom, the bloodline, we are free." As they descended the valley, Briar Rose knew the shadows would never return. The lessons of courage, vigilance, and love would remain, guiding her and the kingdom for generations. The dark origins of her tale had been faced, survived, and finally ended, leaving behind a legacy not of fear, but of hope. The sun rose higher, bathing the land in light. For the first time in centuries, the kingdom breathed in peace, and Briar Rose knew that the true magic of the story, the courage to confront darkness, would endure forever.